أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to begin with a greetings of peace for the new year. This is the first actual live broadcast of ours in this new year of 2024. As usual, we welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news. We advise you on what you can do about it. Today's topic for discussion centers on India. We want to revisit the Babri Masjid controversy with two special guests, Brother Ahmed bin Qasim and Brother Zahir Adil. But before we bring our guests on for what will no doubt be some rich conversation, I want to give the audience a little background, some background information on this ongoing crisis in India via a piece of video that came to my attention a few days ago, courtesy of our brother out of the Chicago area and his broadcast known as The Dean Show. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin that piece of video, Brother Sadiq.
Why are we seeing such a rise in violence and bigotry against Muslims in India?
Right. So let me first just say to you that being a Hindu, it is my duty, being a Hindu, to fight for justice and against injustice, against all people everywhere. That is in fact also the message of the Holy Quran. That is the message of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Prophet Muhammad always said, you have to fight against injustice, no matter who it is for, no matter where, in which part of the world. He did not say, you only fight for injustice, you only fight for justice and against injustice for Muslims. He said, you fight for justice for all people. What's happening in India is very unfortunate. I am an Indian, I am a Hindu, I come from India. And for all my life, since I was born and raised, we did not see or experience any discrimination. Yes, there were structural discriminations, of course, against people, because it's a work in progress, that society has many fault lines. But the kind of attacks on Muslims that we have witnessed in the last 8 years, and I say 8 years because it was 8 years ago in the month of May 2014 that India's current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he came to power. Narendra Modi is a bigot. He is a Hindu supremacist. He is an Islamophobe. He is a hater of Muslims. He is somebody who has presided over a massacre of Muslims. Narendra Modi belongs to a party called the Bharatiya Janata Party that translates as Indian People's Party. There is nothing Indian about it. It is a vile party. It is a vicious party with a horrible ideology driving it. Because the BJP is an offshoot of a much larger organization. That organization is called the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh. That's a mouthful. It's the original is an Indian language. It translates as National Volunteer Corps. The RSS, as it is more popularly known, was founded in 1925. So it's about to complete 97 years on just one ideology, and that is the ideology of Hindu supremacism. The ideology of Hindu supremacism, or it is also known as Hindutva, is very explicit, and it says India belongs only to the Hindus. Non-Hindus, such as Muslims and Christians, are foreigners, they are aliens, they do not belong to India. India should be run only by the Hindus, for the Hindus, and Muslims and Christians should not have fundamental rights, should be treated worse than second-class citizens. That is the ideology of the RSS. The RSS is the ideological parent of the BJP. The BJP is in power in parliament in India, which brought Narendra Modi into power as Prime Minister. And that is why this ideological movement, this political party being in power in India, it has been driving the violence against Muslims all across India, leading to mob lynchings of Muslims, leading to demolitions of Muslim homes and businesses, leading to acts of vandalism and desecration and demolition of Muslim places of worship such as mosques as well as Eidgah Maidans. All of that is being done, and now they are trying to get Muslims, deny Muslims their citizenship by bringing a new citizenship law. That is what is happening in India.
You said Muslims and Christians.
Yes.
So why do you see a lot of Christians here from America, a lot of politicians, they're Christian, why are they supporting such a movement that is against them? And why do you also have many countries, even you've seen some Muslim countries giving awards to this individual?
Well,
many
it
of
is.
us are confused
Yeah,
about this.
absolutely. I agree with you, brother. And it is this is the problem with foreign policy for most countries. You can accuse the American foreign policy of many things, but you can't accuse it of being long-sighted, of being on the right side of human rights. The problem is that most countries cannot see beyond their noses. Now, that is a critical flaw in the formulation of foreign policy. The United States of America, and of course organizations such as mine, the Indian American Muslim Council, and most other organizations we work with, we have been battering the American system, the policy making universe, to do the right thing and to call out bigotry and hatred in India, and to call out the Indian government's failure to control that bigotry and hatred. And indeed, we are getting to some point where the US government and its officials and agencies have started talking about it. And going forward, God willing, we will see more and more response. But yes, we talk about Christians also, because India has more than 30 million Christians, but India has 200 million Muslims. It is only in a country the size of India, which with 1.4 billion people, where that you can say that a group of people who number 200 million is a minority. That's the Muslims. So the foreign policy of all these Muslim countries, so-called Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, which has given an award to Modi, or the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which are now in a partnership with Modi, all of these countries, they do not truly reflect the will of the people. There is no question that the people in most of these countries are horrified at the human rights violations, not just against Muslims, but all people that are being committed by the government of the day.
But this is supposed to be one of the biggest democracies in the world.
It is the largest democracy in the world.
Okay, then they have a police force?
Oh my goodness.
Why is the police force not stopping the lynchings, not stopping the brutality that's happening against the innocent Muslim population?
Great question. Absolutely great question, brother. I thank you for asking me that question. The police in India are historically anti-people. The modern police in India, they were constituted by the British when they ruled India for more than 100 years, almost 200 years, and they left only in 1947. The police were deployed by the British to suppress and crush the opposition to British colonial rule. So the Indian police are fundamentally anti-people. They are designed to be anti-people and anti-democratic. Not very different from the police in most colonial countries. You go to Egypt. I was there in 2011 in Egypt during the Arab Spring. I was at Maidan-e-Tahrir, and I went into police stations. I spoke to local people, and they said the police is the most brutal tool of oppression against us. So on all these countries, you go to Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Egypt, most of these colonial former colonies of the British Empire, the police you will find are the most oppressive elements of the administrations. The same is true. Plus, in addition to that, the police in India are heavily dominated by the Hindus. Not just any Hindus, but upper caste Hindus. Hindus that are Brahmins, that are Thakurs, that are, I don't know about Baniyas, but definitely Brahmins and Thakurs. Now, those upper caste Hindus in the Indian police, they are not just anti-Muslim, they are anti-lower castes also. That is why you find, you will be horrified to know that the average custodial killings in Indian police stations and prisons numbers between 8 and 10 a day. So you have, I mean,
A day?
Yes, sir, a day. You have more than 3,500 custodial, and these are the ones that are recorded, right? More than 3,500 custodial killings a year in India. I mean, just this century, we have seen more than 70,000 people who have died, 60 to 70,000 people who have died in custodial killings. Now, they are virulently anti-Muslim, they are Islamophobic, and therefore, and on the other hand, the Muslims of India have very little representation, not just in the police, but in the entire criminal justice system. Although the Muslims are more than 12% in India's population, they are hardly 1 or 2% in India's judiciary. You will find hardly 1 or 2% of judges in India are Muslims. Likewise for lawyers and government prosecutors, there's likewise for the police, likewise for administrators. So the Muslims in India are truly a dispossessed and a disenfranchised minority. They are large, they are 200 million, and yet they do not have representation. And now, because of the politics of the BJP and the way that this party has come up, this is, in fact, Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister's government today in India, is the first government since India became independent 75 years ago that does not have a single Muslim as a lawmaker, does not have a single Muslim as a minister. That is why the Muslims are facing the brunt of oppression and violations of human rights from the government as much as from the non-state actors, and there is nothing that anybody can do about it.
Is it a fair assessment, and that leads into my next question, how strong is the Hindu nationalism, extremism here in America, but is it a fair assessment if we call it, because for the layman to understand, when you say KKK, this being synonymous with the KKK movement or even more extreme?
Yes. So the KKK wore capes, right? The Hindu nationalists in America do not wear capes. So let me just clarify at the very beginning. Hindu Americans are a model immigrant community. Many of them are great people. They are true Democrats. They live in America. They have integrated themselves in the American society in a great way. They are loyalists. They are great patriots. They are great citizens. They are doctors. They are engineers. They are businessmen. They hold high positions. As we all know, companies like Google, Microsoft are run by Indian origin people. At the same time, there is a minority of Hindu Americans in America who adhere to this ideology of Hindu nationalism. Just a few months ago, a leading Indian American activist named Mauri Saalakhan was invited by Google to do a speech on caste-based discrimination. Mauri Saalakhan is a Dalit. The Dalit caste is a former untouchable caste. The most unfortunate aspect of Hindu society is that it is vertically divided in different castes, and this is unique to the Indian Hindu society. So there are the top castes are called Brahmins, and the lowest castes are called Dalits. And there was a time in India, and there still are some people in India who do not even like to be touched by a Dalit. There are cases in which a Dalit man marries a Brahmin woman and the Dalit man is killed, is murdered. Wow. Yes, they're called untouchables. They were called untouchables, right? And it is against the law in India to discriminate against the Dalit people. Now, Mauri Saalakhan is a fiery activist. She's an amazing woman, an amazing activist. She lives in the United States, and she was invited to speak at Google. More than 3,000 people in Google wrote to Google executives, Google leadership, and said, we don't want her to speak. Now, it is suspected that many of these 3,000 people are upper caste Hindus working in Google. So, and then there are organizations.
So it's Hindus speaking up against this Hindu.
She is not Hindu, she is Dalit.
She's Dalit.
Yes, because she does not consider herself Hindu because they discriminate against her. But the Hindus consider the Dalits to be part of Hinduism. It's complicated, brother, all right? But let me come back to the point. And the point is there are organizations such as the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, HSS, which are a mirror image of the RSS. There's an organization called the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, which basically translates as World Hindu Council of America, which has the same name as the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of India, which is World Hindu Council. You look look at them, you look at their activities, you look at their ideologies, they seem absolutely to be joined at the hip. Then there is Hindu American Foundation, which has recently filed lawsuits against so many people because they barely said, well, these Hindu organizations are connected with the Hindu government, Hindu organizations in India, and it bristled at the idea and filed defamation lawsuits. But if you look at the politics of Hindu American Foundation, they're completely in sync with the oppression of Muslims back in India. So, and then there is an organization that calls itself Overseas Friends of the BJP, OFBJP. Now, BJP is the acronym for the ruling party of India, the BJP. Now, this one calls itself Overseas Friends of the BJP. It's been in existence for more than 20 years, and in 2020 election cycle, it just rushed to register itself as a foreign agent. So what does it mean? It leads us to suspect that it is actually getting money from India. Otherwise, why would you register yourself as a foreign agent in America? This is called Overseas Friends of the BJP. Now, when you have all these organizations in America, you know clearly that they are up to mischief, and that mischief is Hindu nationalism. Now, these people, they go around the country trying to influence the interfaith community, the school boards, the police departments, the city councils, the mayors, the House of Delegates in various states and legislatures, the state governors, and of course US lawmakers. They try and influence all of them and say, hey, do not go against India. Do not speak on human rights violations in India. Do not take any action on on violations of minority rights in India. That a bulk of these people, these organizations, they do that. And that is why we consider them to be fairly strong. But brother, what we know in our hearts is history is on our side. The whole idea that repression, bigotry, discrimination has no future in a world that is increasingly liberal, that is increasingly progressive, that is increasingly pluralist. We are confident that these organizations will bite the dust in the United States of America. Their ideologies will bite the dust in the United States of America, and we will succeed in ensuring that the flag of pluralism keeps on flying high. But in order to do that, we have to fight the good fight and continue doing so.
I want to get your reaction to this video here.
I support the killing of the Muslims and the Sikhs in the Republic of India because they deserve to die.
Terrible.
Filmed, I believe, in Canada. I don't know if you know this individual.
No, I don't.
He's openly advocating to
Imagine.
kill Muslims, not just Muslims, but those
Sikhs.
people confused as Muslim Sikhs.
Imagine.
Yeah.
This is Islamophobia. This is pure Islamophobia. Now, this unfortunately,
So this is just an example. If I can imagine if someone's brave enough to do that here, what are they doing over there where they have the backing of the police and the military and the government?
right. So yes, so we just saw an affidavit has been submitted by an individual in an Indian court just 3 days ago, who is a former member of the RSS, the paramilitary Hindu nationalist movement, and he has gone on record in a court to say that the RSS is involved in bombings across India, which is then blamed on Muslims, and they are arrested and then they are sent away to prison for years upon years. So the RSS, the ideological parent of the BJP, the ideological fount of these Hindu organizations in America, such as the HSS, the Hindu American Foundation, the Seva International, the bunch of these organizations, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, it's fundamentally a Nazi-inspired, a fascist organization which has been involved in violence for decades. And that is the truth. So it's a violent ideology, and they are exporting violence of language, violence in deed, all around the world.
Tell us before we conclude, we saw recently, not too long ago, what happened with the case where you had the Muslim women students who are being discriminated against their hijab. What's the latest with that?
Yes, so the latest with that is that India's Supreme Court has listed that case for a hearing. Now this happened in the month of January in a state called Karnataka. It is in the south of India. That state is ruled by the BJP, which is the party of India's Prime Minister Modi. I talked about, substantially I talked about this political party. This is a hardcore Islamophobic anti-Muslim party. And because they have, this is something very important to understand. The various state governments run by the BJP and the federal government of Prime Minister Modi have been hugely inefficient. They have failed at governance over the years. India.
Okay, we want to thank our brother Eddie and the Dean Show for that very valuable clip. We wanted again to use that to kind of lay the foundation for the discussion that will follow for the remainder of the program. Without any further ado, I want to bring on our guests, Brother Ahmed bin Qasim and Brother Zahir Adel. Welcome to the platform, my brothers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Brother Saalakhan. How are you?
Good, I'm good. I'm glad to see the two of you. MashaAllah ta'ala. The guest that Brother Eddie had on his show, excellent guest. I mean, if the brother hadn't identified himself as Hindu, I would have thought he was a Muslim. His character, his presentation was excellent. We felt that was some good background to have as an introduction for the conversation that we're going to have now. An inauguration, or I should say probably several inaugurations in different parts of the world took place yesterday. I know there was one right here in the Washington area in Montgomery County for a temple that has been erected on the grounds of a historic masjid, a 15th century edifice, a beautiful and historic landmark that was destroyed years ago by the extremists in India. And now a temple has been erected on the same grounds. This has, of course, the attention of Muslims around the world, especially our South Asian brothers and sisters. And it also is of concern to us because much of what we see happening in India is a mirror, so to speak, of what has been taking place in occupied Palestine. There is a connection there. But with that being said, I'd like for you two brothers, first of all, to introduce yourselves. Let's begin with you, Brother Ahmed bin Qasim. Introduce yourself to the audience. This is your second time being a visitor on our broadcast, and let the folks know who you are. And you have some very interesting and traumatic history connected to you and your family. Let's hear from you first, brother.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you again, first of all, for having me here, for inviting me. So my name is Ahmed bin Qasim, and I was born and raised in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and that is where my homeland is. And currently I am a student of political anthropology, and I am studying it. And I am a son of two Kashmiri political prisoners. My father, Dr. Mohammad Qasim, has been behind bars since 1993. He has been jailed for taking part in Kashmir's struggle for liberation, for self-determination. And my mother, she's been in prison for 15 years of her life now for similar reasons. So that is my personal background and where I come from and who I am. So I am very deeply tied to Kashmir and its politics. And obviously, we do not see Kashmir as a part of India. So Kashmiri Muslims, Kashmiris do not see themselves as an Indian minority, so to speak. But obviously, our struggle at the moment is very closely and intimately tied with the struggle of Muslims in India in general, because we seem to be faced with a very common enemy, so to speak, of the Hindu nationalist regime.
And with that introduction, brother, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your family, your mother and father. May Allah ta'ala uh, continue to give them the strength that they need in order to come through this terrible fitna that has gripped your family. May Allah bless them for their sacrifices and for the struggle that has resulted in them being where they are. And may Allah Ta'ala free them soon and restore your family to where it should be. I mean, with that said, before we hear from our brother Zahir, what are your thoughts on this topic that brings us together today? What are your thoughts on this controversy?
I think the first thing that I would say, obviously, the conversation that we all listened to, prior to the beginning of our conversation, in many ways says everything. So I would say that there is very little left for either me or Brother Zahir to say. But I think there is one very important thing that is usually kind of glossed over in these conversations. And I found this to be the case also with the conversation that we just listened to, though obviously the person did a very phenomenal job at kind of talking about what the Muslims in India are faced with, which is this romanticization of the pre-Modi or pre-BJP India, which is very pervasive in these conversations. So, one of the interesting things that we have to keep in mind is that when Babri Masjid was raised and when it was demolished, the government in power was not the government of BJP, but instead the ruling government that time was of Indian National Congress. So the violence against Muslims and the otherization of Muslims in India predates 2014. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. This is something that is very important in that many people, especially in the United States and also elsewhere, tend to exceptionalize the violence that Muslims in India are faced with instead of being able to map a continuity between the violence that they have been faced with. Obviously, we can talk about an increase in the violence, we can talk about an escalation in it, but we cannot talk about it as a rupture, so to speak, as though life for Muslims in India was fine until Modi and BJP came into power. So you have to be able to map a continuity between the anti-Muslim dehumanizing logics and rhetoric of somebody like Sardar Patel in 1947 and somebody like Narendra Modi right now in the present. So that is something that has to be kept in mind. Another quick point that I would kind of add to that is when we talk about Babri Masjid and its demolition and the construction of a temple over it. Now, I have said this before, if I remember correctly, on your show, and this kind of there's a reason I will say it again because it maps on very neatly to this. We have to also read this as a metaphor, so to speak, of what the Indian state, the Hindu nationalist government in India seeks to do with India in totality. So the demolition of Babri Masjid is seen as the demolition of the Muslims in India and their identity and their dignity. And the idea is to construct a Hindu temple over it. And this is something that kind of goes back to what I said in our conversation last time, in the context, in a very different context, but it kind of maps onto it, which is that when Theodore Herzl talked about settler colonialism in Palestine, and his very famous line from his allegorical novel is that if I wish to construct a new building, I must demolish before I can construct. And that is exactly what seems to be happening here. So, what the Indian state has been doing over the past many decades is that they have presented Muslims in India as outsiders, as people who have come from outside. And they have presented Islam also as a religion as external to what they call Indic civilization. So Buddhism is given a place in it, Jainism is given a place in it. But when it comes to Islam, when it comes to Christianity or Abrahamic faiths in general, these are seen as faiths and religions of the other. So it's not just with Babri Mosque. Let me tell you another case. So, for instance, there's a very prominent mosque in Kashmir called Jamia Mosque. If you look at the writings of the Hindu nationalist authors from Savarkar to even contemporary ones, you would find that they claim that this Masjid was originally what they call the Mandir or Temple of Kalima, which is one of their deities. So this is not just the case of Babri Masjid. This is a broader claim that they make, which is that Muslims do not belong in this land, and all their religious places and all the places that they say belong to them that are seen as Muslim places are a result of a Muslim conquest of what were originally Hindu places. So the idea is of this kind of reclaiming these spaces which originally belonged to the Hindus. So I think this logic is what is at play when it comes to the demolition of Babri Masjid and the construction of a temple over it. And what is very interesting, if you also take this into account, which is that none of the people who were involved in the demolition of the mosque were ever punished by the judiciary. And this is something very important because many a times when people talk about these issues, when people talk about these things, the very one of the instinctive responses of people is that let us turn to the judiciary. Let us try to secure justice from the judiciary. The judiciary is going to save us. Now, the case of Babri Masjid, and I say this as a Kashmiri because um, we have seen this for last 70 years, right? How the judiciary acts as an extension of the military occupation in Kashmir, how it legitimizes and vindicates everything that the Indian state does in Kashmir. So the idea or the role of judiciary does not seem to be of providing justice, but rather of normalizing and legalizing the oppression. And in the case of Babri Masjid, we saw something very similar. I mean, it's been around 3 decades or more now, and not a single individual was ever prosecuted, and all of them have been free. Somebody like Advani, he is celebrated in India today, somebody who in many ways oversaw the demolition. So that tells you that the violence against Muslims in India is not incidental, it's not aberrational, it's not something that is to be seen as an anomaly, so to speak, but rather it's deeply systemic. It's deeply systematic. It is the entire social fabric and system seeks to, in many ways, maintain this subjection of Muslims, this otherization of Muslims. I think that is something that we have to keep in mind. Otherwise, we end up, reproducing the logics that, in many ways, obfuscate this systemic nature of the violence that Muslims in India are faced with today.
I agree, my brother. Brother Zahir, what is your take on this, brother? Please begin with an introduction of yourself to the audience, and then share your thoughts on, where we are today, this this inauguration that has taken place. Just whatever your thoughts are on what's happening now, the history behind what's happening now, and anything else that you think would be a benefit to the audience.
Sure. Thank you, Brother Saalakhan.
You're welcome, Akeem.
To introduce myself, my name is Zahir Adil. I lead the Save India from Fascism campaign at Justice for All. I happen to be in the Boston area, and I have been in the United States for many, many years, almost 35 years at this point. I am an Indian by origin, and I grew up in Bombay, and I studied in the north of India at a university called the El-Hajj Muslim University, which is one of the research universities of India. I'm an engineer by training, but I've had an interest in human rights as well as activism for a while. And that's what brought me to Justice for All. And, it's been an interesting time with the organization. I always tell people that engineering is easy. This work is very, very hard. Coming back to the topic at hand, I mean, when I saw Ajit Sahi there and with on the Dean show, and Ajit Bhai is with an organization called the Indian American Muslim Council that we work very closely with in advocacy for Indian issues. Then, of course, a lot of what he said he's the one who would be perfect in saying it because he has so much experience at it. But yes, as far as the Babri Masjid is concerned, I actually completely agree with Ahmed bin Qasim that what has happened just about 8 years ago is the culmination of something that has been planned for many, many years in India. In 1992, when the Babri Masjid, what they did is they brought together a mob. And this was not a mob that was just collected in the vicinity of the mosque itself. By the way, this mosque was 400 years old. But people were collected and they took out a procession, what they call the Rath Yatra, which really means a caravan of chariots. Okay. And they collected people from many, many different states of India, and they converged on this town called Ayodhya in northern India in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And this was deliberate. It wasn't that they were collecting these people to have a peaceful demonstration at the mosque. They were collecting people to demolish the mosque. That was it. The Congress, the government at that time was led by the Indian National Congress, which is seen as a secular party, which is seen by minorities as the party that speaks for their rights. And they did not do enough to prevent the demolition at all. I mean, obviously, we know that it was demolished. But the saga for the mosque actually starts before that. People were not praying at the mosque. And what Hindus had done is that they had forcibly entered the mosque. I don't quite remember the date at this point, but they had forcibly put idols, Hindu idols, in the mosque itself. And they had kept this as a disputed area since the 1940s at some point, and people were not allowed to pray at the mosque. So this was something that had been planned for a while. The planning for a majoritarian state in India, led by the Hindus, as Brother Ajit said, is even longer. I mean, this has been going on since 1925, when the RSS, which he referred to, was first formulated. So the problem is systemic, and it exists in India at the core of the judiciary. It exists at the core of the law maintenance organizations. And unfortunately, it has only become worse since Narendra Modi has come to power. Unfortunately, actually, I think India was headed in a better direction. Now, I will distinguish myself from Brother Qasim here because I happen to be from the main part of India, whereas he happens to be from Kashmir. And I will not say that things were becoming better for the Kashmiris. No. Actually, the Kashmiris have suffered at the hands of the Indians for many, many years, and they will continue to do so until the international community comes to takes a strong stance about what is a disputed territory. But in India, I think there was some improvements happening before Narendra Modi came to power. Excuse me. In fact, when I last visited India, my friends over there was telling me that people don't really bother if you're Muslim or not. And this was in 2014. And people are really more interested in getting the job done. Everybody was kind of busy in what they were doing. And the interesting thing that I noticed is that people were actually becoming polite. In Bombay, the people are usually polite. But in Delhi, where my previous experiences was that people were really rough, there was a certain politeness that was coming in. And unfortunately, with Narendra Modi coming, he turned that around 180 degrees. So that progression that was happening before he came to power was completely reversed. And now, the culmination of what started in 1992 and the symbolism that it brings with the construction of a temple and the inauguration on January 22nd is sending a very strong message to the minorities in India, especially the Muslims, that you are a minority, you do not have the same rights, and We want you to continue to stay as such. So unfortunately, I'm not very hopeful of anything positive happening until somehow maybe the Indian population wakes up and they take the BJP out of power. But again, with the marginalization of not only the minorities but also other political parties in India, I see that very, very difficult in happening. It might happen in certain pockets, as happened in the state of Karnataka, but on the whole, as a national party, I think the only party at this time that is being projected to the Indian people is that you've got the choice of the BJP and the BJP. So you choose which BJP do you want, and both of them are going to be led by Narendra Modi for the future, for the near future.
Subhanallah, it's very, subhanallah, it's very dark and menacing, the atmosphere in India, and it doesn't appear like there is any relief on the horizon. It doesn't appear that way. What are your thoughts, Brother Zahir, on what's been happening in the United States? Has the BJP and its affiliates gained the kind of momentum in terms of, forming relationships and presenting a certain type of image that has enabled it to, to grow in very significant ways within the socio-political construct of the United States? Is there concern that the influence of this party, this extreme demonic mindset, and very similar, in my humble opinion, to Zionism, is it spreading in the United States? Is it gaining a strong foothold here? And if so, what can be done about it from your perspective?
It absolutely is. I will disagree with Brother Ajit at this point. I think he said that there's a small minority of Hindus in the United States that might adhere to the ideology of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. It might be a minority, but it is a large minority. Whenever I go out to a program that has an Indian contingent over there, a lot of these people are pushing the ideology of Hindutva onto Americans. Now, how do they do that? They actually hide behind the piece of the Namaste, and now you know as well as all of us do how often Namaste is being used in advertising and things like that in US television. They also turn to Gandhi when it suits them. Right. So Gandhi was this really peaceful person, blah, blah, blah. He's the father of nonviolence. Actually, that's not true, but that's what they try to portray. Right. They, of course, do not talk about Gandhi's thoughts about the blacks in what was South Africa when he was in South Africa, because it doesn't suit them. They will talk about it if it suits them in the future. Right. And so I have to give it to these people. They know how to handle media. Now, we at Justice for All had the China, we have a campaign for the Uyghur Muslim, and really the Chinese were not very good at handling media. So very often we were able to get information from Chinese sources themselves about what they are doing to the Uyghur, right? Not so with the Indians. The Indians were very, very good at handling media, not only from India itself, but also here within the United States. Now, you said quite correctly that they are taking the same sort of steps as Zionism did. So they are putting a lot of money into the political system. I was at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in August, and this person walks up to me, and I've got this report sitting on our desk saying the Nazification of India. And yet he comes to me with a really big smile and he says, I want you to support us under Narendra Bhai Modi's incentive of bringing the parliament to India, and we are committing $10 million to it. So they're using every single way that they can to influence the interfaith community. They're using it to influence the political community. They're using it to influence the American general public out there. And unfortunately, I think we'd have to really put our money where our mouths are, in the sense that we have to take a lesson. And sometimes, there is always, they say that there's always a silver lining on every cloud. And sometimes I think what's happening in Gaza today might provide that silver lining, because I have seen a lot of Muslims now coming up to me or coming up to Henna, our director in DC, and ask and tell her that I'm beginning to understand why the work that you guys do is important. I'm beginning to understand why my voice is important.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to understand why I need to learn how to articulate my thoughts. This is something that we had not seen before. And I'm hoping that this momentum, inshallah, will carry to the other campaigns, whether it's from Justice for All, from IAMC, for anybody else. But we really need to get involved at this point. We have to show people that we have a latent power, and we need to project that power onto American sources, both with our voices as well as with our money wherever it's needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm sorry I digressed a little bit over there.
That's all right. That's quite
But,
all right. You share
yeah.
some very useful information. Alhamdulillah. Brother Ahmed, Brother Adil and I, we are here in the United States. You are on the other side of the world. What are you seeing? What is your perspective from where you are? And what thoughts would you like to share based upon that perspective?
I think it is what you just said. You are on the other side, I'm here. I think what I would say is that what we are seeing right now is how malleable these distinctions have become, of here and there. So, for instance, in Kashmir right now, since October 7th, Friday prayers in the main mosque in Srinagar, which is the Jamia Masjid as we call it, have not been allowed. And the reason is Gaza. So mosques are being shut in Srinagar because of something that is happening in Gaza. And why are mosques being shut is because there is this fear that the prayer might quickly transform into a protest for the people of Palestine, because there's a very, very small distinction between the two for Muslims, right? Rather, one of the prophetic narrations is that prayer is the weapon of a believer. So, for Kashmiri Muslims being under occupation themselves, have always taken to streets for the people of Palestine, and they've gone to prisons for this reason. In Srinagar, which is the capital of Kashmir Valley, a city that is not safe for its inhabitants, you will find a graffiti saying "Save Gaza" on many walls, right? So the world we live in, the oppressors have alliances, as Brother Zahir talked about, and it's not just an ideological alliance. It's not just an alliance based on ideas. It's a very concrete, strategic, military, and technological alliance. So, for instance, in Kashmir, Israel has invested a lot in India's agricultural industry in Kashmir. So we're not just talking about imaginary alliances based on ideas. We're talking about ideas that are then actualized in these, coming together of the oppressors. So I think what is very important is that when we talk about the people of Palestine, when we talk about Kashmir, when we talk about the people in East Turkestan, the Uyghurs, we have to make sure that our alliance does not remain limited to verbal solidarity. There has to be a strength in this alliance that actualizes on the ground. And if you ask me, for instance, you said what is my perspective being there, I would tell you that when you have a person on ground, let's say in India, a Muslim, or in Kashmir, for them, the advocacy work that is happening in the United States, for instance, would mean a lot when they see its effect being translated on the ground. So, when they see a political prisoner coming home, when they see some measure of relief on ground, that is when their trust in the advocacy work will also kind of kind of become manifest. Because otherwise, many a times what happens is that international community, the the category itself, you might know it, it's become this pejorative term as well. Now, when people say, we appeal to the international community, many oppressed people, the first thing they say is that, what are you talking about exactly? Where is this international community? Because a genocide has unfolded in Gaza, and the recent South African case in ICJ has given a lot of hope to people. But at the same time, a genocide has happened in Gaza. Kashmir has been under occupation for 7 decades. Muslims in India have faced, brutal forms of violence, and there have been condemnations, verbal, but sometimes even those are not forthcoming, right? So when it comes to advocacy work, there has to be a strong connection that it has with ensuring that its effect is seen on the ground for the people. Because obviously, at the end of the day, its aim is to provide justice to people on the ground. So therefore, I think that is something that we ought to focus on, which is that people on the ground must feel that if their voices are suppressed. So for instance, if you talk, I'm talking about Kashmir because I come from there. That's why I can talk about it in a better way. So you talk about Kashmir right now, the press in Kashmir is under complete repression. So all the media houses, you have two choices. You have to narrate stories that the state allows you to narrate, but that's not it. You have to narrate it in a vocabulary that the state also provides you with. And
Yeah.
let's say you don't narrate it that way, then what is going to happen? Either there's going to be outright manifest violence. So journalists have been in jail both in India and also in Kashmir. Media houses have been shut. Kashmir Wala, which is a prominent news outlet in Kashmir, it was shut recently. Asif Sultan, Fahad Shah was recently released. He was in prison. There have been journalists put behind bars for years now. Or alternatively, if this strategy is not deployed, then the state is simply going to limit advertisements. It's not going to allow your media house revenue, right? So what's going to happen is that after a year, your media house is going to be bankrupt and you're going to close it on your own. So if this is the level of repression on the ground, that the people are not even able to, do the work of documentation, the responsibility of those outside increases exponentially because of this repression on ground. Now your responsibility to do the work of documentation, to do the advocacy work, and to ensure that the people on the ground are not abandoned, your responsibility as a result increases exponentially. So that is something that I would say. And to end what I just said, there's also many things that do not reach people. So, for instance, I have the privilege that I have been able to travel outside Kashmir. What the Indian state has systematically been doing now for the past few years is that it denies passports to dissidents, right? Both in India and also in Kashmir. So
Mhm.
let's say you are a Kashmiri journalist or you are a normal Kashmiri who espouses views that the Indian state sees as seditious. Now you are being denied the right to travel outside of Kashmir or India. So even if you're not imprisoned, you are imprisoned on your land and you're not allowed to go out because there's this fear that if this person goes out, he might be able to speak about what's been happening on the ground. So
Mhm.
there are many things that are not reported. So as a result, I feel that when it comes to the people who have the privilege of being outside, their responsibility increases exponentially as to what they must do for the people on the ground.
Okay, Brother Ahmed bin Qasim, I want to thank you for joining us, brother. We're going to have you back, inshallah ta'ala. As always, these types of conversations, they go fast. And we are at the end of our broadcast. What I'd like to do is give Brother Zahir 2 minutes to make a 2 minute closing summary of his thoughts on today's topic, and then we're going to end with a very, very short piece of video that we want to serve as a reminder to our audience. Go ahead, Brother Zahir.
Yeah, I would like to tell the audience, wherever you are, in whichever country, get involved. Know that this is 200 million Muslims in India. This is a large population. And as Ajit Sahi said, that this is only in India that's possible that you have 200 million Muslims and you'll be a small minority, right? We have probably about 18%, that's it, of the Indian population. The largest segment of the Indian population happens to be lower caste, what the Hindus would say, lower caste Hindus or Dalits. But unfortunately, we cannot rely on them. So Tanmohi Sundararajan, as he quite correctly talked about, as doing wonderful work, but she's here in the United States. The people in India, the ones who are low caste Hindus, they will still become anti-Muslim. They will become anti-Christian at the flip of a coin. And the coins are being flipped by the higher caste Hindus, unfortunately. But that's going to happen. So we cannot rely on them. We have only ourselves to rely on. I would even say that other than very, very few Christian leaders in India, most will not speak for you. 249 churches were destroyed in 36 hours in the state of Manipur. But very, very few Christian leaders would still stand with you. So you only have yourself to rely on. And you have the Muslims of the entire world. But the entire world, Muslims need to understand that the problems that are happening in India, the problems that are happening in Gaza, in East Turkestan, they are problems of the Ummah. And that is sometimes, I think, we do not, although we hear that khutbah time and time again, we do not quite relate to it as such. I'm going to please ask you, empower yourselves in any which way possible, in whichever country that you're in, and all of us, if nothing else, we can speak, we can write. Thank you.
I mean, okay, on that note, we want to close out, but with a reminder. We usually close out with Surah Al-Asr, which is what I'm going to do now, but then following my close, we're going to show just a short piece of video from having to do with the drama, the very unfortunate drama taking place right now in Gaza, in occupied Palestine, and the effect that it's happening in different parts of the world, including in South Africa. We want to end with this piece of video, inshallah ta'ala, of an Andrew Feinstein. He's a former South African MP, speaking on South Africa's indictment on apartheid Israel. And he was speaking in preparation for a demonstration that was going to be taking place in South Africa, which has already taken place, one of many that have taken place around the world. And but what he has to say is a very, very important reminder of the connection, the connection between all of these oppressions that are taking place, and by extension, the connection in struggle that has to take place among people of truth, people of justice, people of goodwill, people who want to bring peace and through justice into the world, to all corners of the world. So on that note, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Wal Asr, Innal Insana Lafi Khusr, Illa Alladhina Amanu wa Amalu Salihat, wa Tawasaw bil Haqq, wa Tawasaw bis Sabr, which means, in translation of the meaning, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time, through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Feinstein here today to the Peace and Justice Project. Andrew is a former MP in South Africa for the African National Congress, great campaigner on exposing the corruption of the arms trade, but crucially also a lecturer at Auschwitz on the issues of genocide. And we're here today to talk about this document, South Africa's submission to the International Court of Justice, charging Israel with genocide for its military activities in Gaza.
In my career, investigating and writing about armed conflict, war, and the arms trade that supports it, I don't think I've ever seen a legal document as thorough, as precise, and as impressive as this. And its importance is that the country taking Israel to the ICJ is a country that has itself experienced the most extreme form of racist oppression that we have seen. I think gives the filing added impact and added symbolic importance. In addition to that, we should remind ourselves that both Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu were very explicit in their criticism of Israel. Mandela said, "Of course I will be critical of that entity that supported and armed and aided my oppressor."
What's the implications for Israel if the court finds in favour of the South African application?
It will mean that one of the world's highest courts has defined what it is doing as genocide, the crime of all crimes.
30,000 already dead. Goodness knows how many more are going to be killed in the next few weeks, and goodness knows how many bodies are in all that rubble.
You know, Jeremy, I lived in apartheid South Africa, but as a part of the liberation movement to end apartheid, I saw the most horrendous suffering of ordinary people at the hands of the South African apartheid state. Never did I imagine that in my lifetime I would see what we've seen for the past 2 months, day after day after day, waking up to the footage of tiny children being mercilessly bombed, shot at, having lost their parents, often their siblings, seeing entire extended families wiped out. I never imagined that in my lifetime I would see human suffering of this sort, let alone that that human suffering is being supported by, aided, abetted, and facilitated by the governments of the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, etc., etc. This document is of extraordinary importance to humankind. If South Africa succeeds, it will make clear that no one is above the law, that no one can slaughter innocent people in the way that we have seen in the most appalling circumstances. So in the name of humanity, come out on the streets on the 13th of January as we again march for Palestine and march for an immediate ceasefire.
If you're in the UK and you can get to London on Saturday, please do. But if you can't get to London or you're not in the UK, join any local demonstration in solidarity with those that are going through such horrendous times, watching their loved ones and families being murdered in front of them by arms supplied by the United States and Britain. Be there.